Hello and welcome to Searching for the Question Live. My name is David Orban, and our conversations are always about topics that, interest me because I invite the guests, but I also try to find topics that are relevant in what I believe is an important point about our lives today, how technology impacts the world, society, our communities, families, our individual lives, and that, at least in my opinion, the impact of technology is positive. It causes disruptions, it causes changes. Those changes can be complex, maybe painful. We need to adapt, and the changes can be radical enough or fast enough to push us up to and maybe beyond the limits of our adaptability. But nonetheless, I hope that these conversations are thought-provoking for you as well, following them, and that you learn something, which at least for me is always joyful. And that is why today's guests are so exciting. Tony Seba and Jamie Arbib just published this week their new book, Stellar, A World Beyond Limits and How to Get There. And this book is, I hope and believe, is going to be not only important, but represent an opportunity for a lot of people, but especially policymakers and the protagonists building these technologies to wonder what can they do so that this world described in Stellar comes about. And so that is what we are going to discuss today. And let me welcome Jamie and Tony to Searching for the Question.
Hi, David.
Hi, David.
Hello,
thank you for having us.
Hello, Jamie. No, thank you for being here. So how do you see the arch of the evolution of your thinking, Tony and Jamie, in having the opportunity to formalize your thinking in various books? Have you changed your mind about things, or are you content, especially you, Tony, with your charts, exponential changes in solar and battery, to have been proven right, and for the International Energy Agency starting to wake up from their 20-year slumber and realize that that the changes are indeed not linear but exponential? So being right is important, but evolving one's thinking is equally important. What did you change in your thinking, one and the other?
Perfect.
I will always let you decide who speaks first.
Okay. Tony, shall I go
Or
first?
we will always go in alphabetical order. Let's do that.
No, Jamie's fine. Jamie, yeah.
Very good. Yeah. So I mean, Tony and I have been working together for 9 years now, and it's been an extraordinary journey. I think we embarked on this journey together, really trying to kind of explore. We were really asking, I think, two questions, Tony. Ultimately, I think we kind of realized that Tony's work prior to meeting me had set out, how fast change was happening. Right, he had an incredible framework that's been proven right over time to understand technology disruptions, and the IEA and others are beginning to adopt some of those methodologies and understand that change is non-linear and exponential and so on and so forth. And I think that's that was kind of the starting point. But what we really connected on and what we were exploring was the question of, well, yes, we've got change to the energy system, food and agriculture, transportation, and so on. But what are the kind of cascading implications of that change, right? How does that ripple out across society? And that was the first line of inquiry. And that, because, in our view, not only did we not understand how quickly change happens, but we didn't understand the profound impact that change can have. So, I mean, very quickly, an example might be, the car disrupting the horse, which we've written about before, which, happened over 20 years in America at the beginning of the last century, right? Going from 2% of vehicles on the road in 1905 to 95% in 2025. So super fast transformation. But actually what happened alongside that was a disruption of pretty much every part of society, right? It changed where we lived. It changed how we built our cities, where we sited our schools and our hospitals. It changed the retail industry. It changed how we dated. It changed, the kinds of people we would come into contact with, and the speed and the range of travel. And it changed global geopolitics, right? 20th century geopolitics really became about the geopolitics of oil. And so, these things have, profound implications. And so we were interested in the cascading implications of the disruptions that we see coming up ahead of us now, as we see pretty much every industry disrupted over the next 20 or so years, that they're going to really get to the root of society. They won't just transform individual industries. They'll create huge new possibilities and create a fundamental change, we think, to the structure of society. The second question that we were really asking, which ends up in the same place, was essentially, what really drives our problems? I mean, I'd spent 20 or so years, investing in clean technology and really, acting as an environmentalist through philanthropy and other mechanisms. And I'd become kind of discontented with the solutions suggested, by the environmental movement, which seemed to me never to get to the root of the problem. Right? Either we were talking about kind of techno fixes, right? We're talking about kind of cleaner energy technologies, slightly more efficient energy technologies. We're talking about capturing.
I cannot but intervene there, because some of the solutions proposed, like the compact fluorescent lights, were
Right.
so abysmally bad that it was evident nobody would want them, because they were slow to light up. They had a frequency of light that was just sickly. But then luckily we had the LEDs, and LEDs, at least I think, are great. Sunlight is even better, natural sunlight. But yes, I agree with you that the traditional approach to clean technology, sustainability, and green living has not been successful, except that technology kept exponentially advancing.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And so the techno fixes, we felt wouldn't work, because they're essentially they're making the old technology less bad, largely, rather than creating something entirely different. And then the other kind of lines of solutions are, fixes to our systems, whether they're political, economic, or social systems. So, the clean capitalism, or regenerative capitalism, or kinder capitalism, to make capitalism a bit less bad. Or the other kind of group of solutions are kind of behavioral change ones, right? We should all be less greedy, or we should give up stuff. We shouldn't travel. We shouldn't fly. We shouldn't do this or that. We should recycle more, and so on. But again, all of those solutions don't get to the root of why we have capitalism as the most dominant economic system, right? Why we behave in certain ways, why society is structured in a certain way. And I think, we were trying to get to the root is, what really drives that? Why has capitalism won out? Because if you can't answer that, then you're dreaming. You're woefully naive if you think you can just reform capitalism to make it less bad, or you can change our behavior, and we're willingly going to do it. And all those solutions have proved totally ineffectual over time. So they were really the kind of tandem explorations we were on, really trying to get to the root of what drives our societies to kind of be the way they are today. And we felt that if we could understand that, we could understand why we have the problems that we face today, what's really behind them, why the world is as it is, and then begin to understand, well, what else could change? How could that itself be transformed? What are the future possibilities that we might see? So yeah, absolutely. Our thinking's developed over the course of 9 years. I mean, Tony will talk about the various meetings we've had, and how we come away from every meeting. Well, Tony, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, no, I mean, Yeah, David. Yes, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to give you, Tony, the opportunity of both answering my previous question, but maybe start entering into what you came to realize with the book, which is not a very thick book, but very ambitious in what it covers, because it not only talks about technology, but indeed it talks about economic systems,
Yes.
political systems, social organization, and even the benefits of your view to the lives of individuals, of how people can live healthier and more satisfying, empowering lives. So,
Right.
you have come to being, Tony, a very effective technology evangelist, to potentially founding a new religion.
So we as Jamie and I went through this journey, right, for 9 years. The thing that so we wanted to understand a couple of things, just to double click on what Jamie was saying. One is, what are the implications, right, of the implications of disruption, right? And also, what happens when we put together all of these disruptions? 9 years ago, we saw disruptions of energy, transportation, food, materials, information, intelligence, just on the horizon. And you could look at them in silos, right? Or you could look at them all together, which is ultimately what we decided to do. But we needed to study them one at a time and then put it all together. But we decided to understand, to get to the root. What is the root of civilization? Why are things the way they are in the way we produce things? Why do we have democracy at all? Why do we have the belief systems that we have? Why are things the way they are, right? We thought that unless we understood the very root of civilization, going all the way back, right, to Sumer and before, to the Neolithic revolution, when agriculture happened and cities, permanent cities happened, right? And so we thought that unless we got to that root, we could not understand, right, how to solve problems, right? We had to get to that root. And it's been quite an exploration. I mean, Jamie and I live in San Francisco, Jamie lives in London. And we get together to brainstorm once every quarter, once every 4 months. And every time we get together, we're like, we cracked it, right? We cracked it. We go deeper, and broader, right? Because we have to do both. We have to do the implication, the ripple effects, as well as getting to the root. And so many times we said, oh my God, we got it, right? We cracked it. And then 3 months later, we say, oh, no, this time we did get it, right? And that had a lot to do with, why this, right? Why this? There are a lot of things, we're like, our system, what we call extraction, is like water, and we're the fish. We assume that this is the way things are and always have been. We assume that, human nature is what we see today, not a variation that depends on this context, right? So the things so we think we got to the very root of civilization, right?
Wonderful.
Yeah. So after all that exploration, you can say that we started with rethinking humanity, but that really was a first attempt. And as Jamie likes to say, we probably left the human out of rethinking humanity.
That is a very interesting observation, and I'm a technophile, and I didn't initially notice that, but I did notice that you definitely brought humans and humanity in the center of Stellar. Ed McGuire says hello to all of us and says nice to meet again.
Hi, Ed.
Other
Good to see
people are greeting and sending comments. So from time to time, we will be able to bring up questions from our audience as well if they have questions to ask at the right time in our conversation. So the next question I would like to ask is for you to define and contrast the current economic system, which is the extractive, the X system that you describe in the book, and the stellar economic system, which starts from the triumph of solar, wind, and batteries, and everything that comes with it. The super energy, the abundance of energy that it creates, with the fundamental difference that the first requires a constant supply of external sources, and the second doesn't, or it does, but it is 80 billion kilometers away, and we don't count the sun as being the externality for another few billion years, and then we will think about it, right? So
you cracked it. You cracked it, David. That's it. We can go home now, right? That is, that's it. But Jamie, why don't you get started with the X flow, and I'll, I can talk about Stellar, right?
Yeah. Okay, so David, if we look back at through human history to the sort of dawn of the Neolithic age, what really happened was that we moved into a kind of new model. Actually, if you could go back to that slide that you'd showed before with the Neolithic package, that'd be really interesting, because what really happened was that we entered a new system of production. Essentially, what we were doing with the agricultural revolution was essentially harnessing inputs, right, that we needed to produce what we needed. So we started by taking labor and land, right, into this system of production and applying knowledge, essentially technology, to that to produce the outputs we wanted. Right? So a kind of flow-based system where we're harnessing these inputs that are both external to the production system, right, and they're excludable. It means I have it or you have it. Right, and when you're in a system like that, what happens is that you're in a competitive world, right? You've got these early villages in Mesopotamia who begin to have a food surplus and expand, and they're basically competing for those same inputs, right? And so you end up in a system where competitive advantage is everything, right? What we call the growth imperative comes to be the key dynamic of extraction, right? You have to grow or you get outgrown. Right, you have to increase your technological capabilities, your military capabilities, your wealth, your scale, your reach, so that you can outcompete your neighbors. Because if you don't, you essentially become an input into their system. Right? So we have at the heart of our system this growth imperative, and that's really important to realize, because that's the root. The X flow and the growth imperative that comes from it is what everything else. It's kind of the evolutionary context of civilization, right? Everything that we see in society is selected against that backdrop, right? Does it improve growth? And so what we've seen through human history, and we in the book, we go all the way back to Sumer, the first great civilization, 5,000 years ago. And we see the same essence of society, the same package. We see private ownership, we see central government, we see kind of division of labor and a class structure. All those things on that list, we organize socially the same way. We move to nuclear families, we see money and debt. So same kind of the basis of the economic model. But yes, sure, we've got democracy instead of monarchy now and so on. But basically it's the same. And we also see the same problems, right? So out of that root, come the way we organize our society, right? That it's the basis of our political system, our economic system, our social structures that selects for that. It also creates the same problems, right? We see environmental degradation, we see inequality, slavery, forced labor through every civilization. We see, we see conflict, right, through every civilization, and that's because they're inherent in this system, right? They're not problems that we can solve, right? All we can do is make them a bit less bad. They're essentially features, not bugs. And by that, what we mean is there is an advantage in this world of extraction, right, to the exploitation of labor and the exploitation of the planet.
Peter is asking, why did capitalism win? And maybe listening to what you just said is that in this extractive world, capitalism is the best economic relationship that is evolutionarily adapted to win in that particular competitive exclusionary system, right?
It drives growth best. We've tried all the other isms, right? And capitalism is the one that's won out in our area. And it's exactly that. It is this evolutionary context, right? And it leads to the problems we have. It leads so we've seen plenty of societies through history try and live sustainably or equitably, right? And they've just been run over by those that don't. So you can't, we could. And as I was saying before, there's an advantage in extraction to the exploitation of people and planet, right? You get cheap labor and cheap resources. You have a competitive advantage the more you exploit. I mean, you do have to balance it a bit. There's what we call a kind of minimum viable stability, right? You can't prioritize growth at all costs because it destabilizes and society falls apart. But basically, you need to maximize growth whilst keeping the show on the road, right? And so that's why we can't solve the problems that we see in society today. Right, there's this constant. Yeah, Tony, sorry.
Because they're inherent, right? So if you think of the extraction production engine based on the X flow, which is the input of capital, people, and planet, right? Land, labor, capital. Essentially all of these issues, what we call toxic outputs, inequality, conflict, environmental degradation. All of those are inherent to extraction, right? You cannot solve them. You can make them less bad, but you cannot solve them, right? The more output, what we call useful output, heat and food and transportation and housing and so on, the more useful output, the more toxic output by far. Right. This is, for the scientists in the audience, this is a high entropy system, right? To produce one bit of useful output, we produce a ton of toxic output, right? And toxic doesn't just mean environmental. It does, but it also means, inequality and war and, genocide and slavery and forced labor and sexism and all those things are inherent to the system, right? And so why did capitalism win out? Because it's the most efficient system to do this, right? But it is brutal, it's vicious. Capitalism, extraction itself, has no ethics, has no morals, right? It's just a very efficient system to run this extraction engine.
And so you spent a given number of years to think about the implications of the coming age when, and in many ways, and in some places it is already in place, a growing number of countries produce 100% of their electricity from renewable sources. And that doesn't mean 100% of their energy yet, but we see a path towards your vision of society being 100% powered by renewable energy, in particular solar, wind, and batteries. So you dug deep in understanding the implications of this. What does it mean? And that is what Stellar is.
Right. So just it's not renewable energy; it's stellar energy, right? I mean, any form of energy that is based on the X flow, right? If you need a constant flow of anything, right, clean or not clean, then you have not solved, extraction issues. You have not solved inequality. You have not solved political issues. You have not solved geopolitical issues, because you still need, this is essentially what we would call clean extraction, right? You still have those other issues. It's playing extraction whack-a-mole, right? Where, you dial down some issues and, other issues still pop up, right? So this is not about renewables at all, right? This is about stellar technologies. So what do we mean by stellar technologies? Stellar technologies, essentially, once they are built, they don't need any X flow, right? They don't need basically to exploit people, planet, or capital, because they embed, right, land, labor, and capital. So if you think of the solar panel, right, once you install it, it's going to generate energy for 50, 60, 70 years. It embeds, right? The only input is the sunshine, essentially, right? And if you think, and that's not the case with other clean energies, right? Except with wind, it's the same dynamic, right? Once you install it, the energy essentially is free. It doesn't need X flow, right? It doesn't need land, labor, and capital as inputs to keep producing. They just produce. Whether there is demand or not, it's like a star. And that's why we call this stellar. It's like a star. Once you build the star, right, it just shines. It doesn't matter what the demand for that light is, it just shines. So those are stellar technologies. So when we talk about energy, we talk about solar, wind, and battery. We don't talk about quote unquote renewable energy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
David, it might be worth just adding in AI there as the kind of the other key element of stellar technology, because we talk about the stellar core being stellar energy and stellar, well, what we call artificial labor, which is essentially AI plus robotics, right? Because it's the same dynamics with artificial intelligence and robotics, right? So you need a huge amount of energy, of resources, of intelligence to create an AI, a functioning AI. At a certain point in time, it will reach a kind of critical point where it begins to self-improve, right? Where that intelligence essentially becomes embodied, with materials essentially become embodied. So and so you get to a point with stellar energy and stellar intelligence, once they reach that kind of critical ignition point, where essentially you have a self-sustaining system, right? It self-improves, it self-builds, it self-improves, and so on. And it no longer needs any kind of flow of external resources from the planet. Right, all it needs to fire it is the light from the sun, the photons from the sun that are external. So it's no longer depletative at a planetary level. And as Tony was explaining earlier, certainly at Earth system level, an extractive system is very high entropy, right? So it kind of holds the seeds of its own destruction, right? It can't continue indefinitely, right? Whereas a stellar system, once it's built, right, is essentially negative entropy. It's taking energy from beyond the Earth system, and it's creating a superabundance of both labor and energy, which can be used to restore the world around us.
In 12 years ago, I published the Network Society Manifesto that listed these technologies, that you list as well, and characterize them as each leading towards decentralized systems. Because one of the reasons why stellar technologies are going to be able to express a non-competitive or a less competitive economic and social dynamic is because there are fewer reasons for local or global domination through the supply chains of whether it is energy or food or technology or even intelligence and inventions, because those hopefully will develop in a decentralized manner as well. The question about AI is open, and maybe we will go back to it because there are important open questions about powerful AI, artificial general intelligence, artificial superintelligence, its compatibility with flourishing human futures. But let's first cover more about the book. My next question is about one of the statements and implications that are bound to be controversial in the book and will give an opportunity for your critics or enemies to label you as communists, because you say that private property will disappear. So let's assume you are right. And in some ways and to some degree, we can already see that for a lot of people, the choice of taking an Uber is a much better choice than buying a car. And they don't own a car, and they are very fine with that. For a lot of people, the choice of renting a house rather than buying a house is more forced than a choice, but because they cannot afford to buy a house. But even in that case, maybe not even realizing, but they gain the freedom of being able to move around much more flexibly than not someone who is imprisoned by that property. So how do you see regulatory systems allowing that evolution towards the world that you see, where property is not more defining wealth that directly?
Yeah. Shall I go, Tony? Do you want to answer?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, two comments there. So you're right. I mean, the concepts we deal with sound a bit like communism, right? In that, but communism is an extractive concept, right? And it's been a total disaster within extraction, right? Because it kills the incentives to grow, essentially. And so it's always been outcompeted elsewhere, and it's come with some serious issues. So we're in this world of extraction. There's this stellar world here. Let's ignore the journey between the two for the moment and look at that end state. Right? Assume we get to that world for a moment. So let's imagine we're in that world where essentially we've built stellar energy, stellar intelligence. We have everything else. There is no more flow of resources. Right, we don't need it. So the system, the robots we've built with each software update can do more and more work, right, of better quality. You have a superabundance of energy. You have a superabundance of labor, right? Private property has been an essential part of extraction. Right? It's given an advantage. It's given an advantage to those, a competitive advantage to those societies that have adopted it. That's why we've seen it come back time and time again through every society. But if you're in that world, right, private ownership essentially requires, at least of the means of production, requires a return on capital, right? And so you're always going to have more expensive energy if you have private ownership. And I think it's really important to understand the kind of the mechanism of change right here, because I think in your question, you talked, how are regulatory structures or governments today going to allow that? And in our view, change is not top down, right? It's bottom up and emergent. And you talked about distributed or decentralized societies. I mean, this is the way change happens, right? It comes from the edge. It comes from those regions where there is less incumbency, less resistance to change. We might see it happen in Ukraine. We might see it happen in China. We might see it happen in, the Middle East or other areas where they have the, I guess, more agency to affect, profound and radical change. And so the joy, I guess, of these technologies, as you pointed out, is that they are distributed, right? So it can happen at much smaller scale, right? You can build a stellar energy system at a kind of city level. And so, you have a community that builds this system, right? It builds a stellar energy system. Essentially, you have super abundant energy and free energy, essentially, or at least zero marginal cost. You have zero marginal cost energy. Now, if that system gets to that ignition point we talk about, right, where it becomes self-improving and self-sustaining, right, private ownership is a disadvantage, right, compared to a different form of ownership model. You'll have higher cost energy. So within, the transition, within the rules of extraction, you will be outcompeted by somewhere that experiments with new ownership structures. Right, you'll attract investment. You'll have competitive advantage across the board. So ultimately, we think this is a sort of bottom-up kind of emergent transition where transformation, where individual cities and regions get going and build these stellar energy systems, and they just outcompete, right? And other places are forced to catch up. Those that resist, probably the West and the incumbency, just get left behind and dragged along. Tony. Yeah.
So we see the stellar core, right? Stellar energy and stellar labor, right? Artificial labor, artificial intelligence, and robotics as a new platform for civilization, right? A new platform like the internet, right? The internet is public. It's a public good, right? I mean, we have built a ton of wealth on top of the internet, right? Or like the interstate highway system, which is also a public good. And we have built, tens of trillions of dollars of wealth on top, right? So the applications of those basically are where, we can build the wealth and so on. Although, wealth may have no meaning in stellar, right? But in the beginning, we see the stellar core as the place where we should think about it being a public good, right? And we can keep our, nobody's going to take property away. But what we're saying is that we should be open to the possibility and the likelihood that the societies that went out, right, because it makes economic sense and social sense and so on, are the societies that keep this platform as an open platform. And we're starting to see that where the companies, private AI, extraction AI is essentially losing ground to open source AI, right? So, the market itself is saying that open source AI, more public good AI is the way to go, right? So this is not really outside of what really is already going. I mean, we built the internet with open source technologies, right? And then a lot of companies were built on top of that, right? So there is precedence to the idea that the platform can be an open source public good, and we can build a lot of things on top of that.
The projections that you make are astonishingly ambitious. Whether it is 30 years or 10 years for this societal phase change, even at 30 years, what we are seeing is the replacement of all kinds of infrastructure, physical and regulatory infrastructure, and ultimately political and cultural infrastructure or mindset completely changing as well. This is not unprecedented, maybe, but since we are the descendants of the survivors, we tend to forget the upheaval and the suffering that profound and rapid disruptions have created in the past. When the Industrial Revolution went through and people started migrating in the cities, and London became foggy that you couldn't even see unless you were Jack the Ripper. And we now are reminded by how bad that was through Dickensian dystopias describing that time. Well, if you go to London, it's a wonderful city today, right? So how can we make sure that the change happens at the optimum combination of speed and minimizing suffering and conflict?
Yeah, so look, one of the things that we've done at RethinkX over the last 9 years is study change, disruption, and transformation, not just throughout history, but before, right? History. We've looked at something like 1,500 disruptions, and the way they happen is well known. I mean, they happen. We're usually in a system equilibrium where change is hard. And then some technology convergence happens that ruptures that system and makes change, change. If you look at if you think of a boulder in a valley, pushing that, in a stable system, pushing that boulder uphill is very, very hard. Change is hard. But when that system is ruptured and technology disruptions happen, you can see that boulder on top, right? Change is inevitable and it happens very fast. So we've seen 10, 20 year disruptions, throughout history, hundreds of times. In fact, the fantasy is not that they're going to happen fast. The fantasy is that they're not going to happen quickly. Does that make sense? That is the fantasy. That is the extractive mindset that, we see linearly and we see change as incremental and so on and so forth, right? That's not the way it happens. In a stable system, yes. But when the system ruptures, which it has in energy, in intelligence, in labor, in transportation, I mean, anywhere you look, we're already in the middle of a technological disruption, right? In food, it's happening now at different speeds. EVs are exponential. AI is double exponential. Solar is improving at a rate of 11% per year or so, and so on, right? So they're going at different speeds, but we're already in the middle of those transformations. So denying it is the issue, right? If we just prepared, and this is one of the things, this is exactly one of the reasons why Jamie and I even started RethinkX. I mean, we met. Jamie, do you want to tell the story?
Yeah, no, sure. When I go there, I mean, So I mean, I remember. I mean, I was the first time I met Tony was kind of mind blowing. We were, I mean, long backstory, but we both ended up in Washington 9 years ago. I guess it was pretty much exactly 9 years ago now. At a US military think tank, right? A group called the Military Advisory Board. I think they're kind of inside outside military think tank, and they were running a kind of scenario planning exercise, asking the question: look, if we get off fossil fuels very quickly, what will it mean for global geopolitics? And so they started with they invited a group of experts, I think maybe 8 of us, along to brief them, and they had all the kind of the regular guys, big oil companies, the State Department, so on and so forth, and pretty much everyone had the same kind of vision of how quickly change was going to happen, right? They had these projections for the adoption of solar PV, the adoption of electric vehicles, or these kind of straight lines, in some cases out to 2050, which and those projections have have been surpassed even today, right? We're not even, we're still 25 years away from 2050. They just, saw kind of slow incremental change. And I'll never forget Tony getting up and saying to the generals in the room, look, that's not how disruption happens, right? It's not a kind of slow incremental progression. It's rapid, it's non-linear. These things are over in the 2030s. And if you make your plans based on these faulty forecasts, you're going to make some kind of major mistakes. And I think, Tony and I ended up going for coffee afterwards, which is kind of the genesis of RethinkX. But really, we saw, massive change coming really quickly to pretty much every industry, every sector. And and so we set up RethinkX as a not-for-profit research organization, really to provide decision makers across society with better information on which to take their decisions, on which to base their decisions. And that was a kind of, the starting point for us. And so I think that, that speed of change is a kind of critical piece, but the piece that people, and people are beginning to understand that, right? It's kind of making it into the ether. But what people still don't understand is the kind of nature of change, right? That it's not just a kind of substitution of one technology for another, that actually it's a fundamental transformation of the system, right, where everything changes. And that's, we always use the analogy of a caterpillar to a butterfly, right? I think it was Buckminster Fuller that said, there's nothing about a caterpillar that tells you it's going to become a butterfly. Right, and I think it's really insightful in the the new energy system that we're about to see, looks nothing like the old energy system, right? It's not just the old energy system with solar, with gas and coal unplugged and solar and wind plugged in, right? It's a functionally different system with different possibilities, different dynamics, and it looks entirely different. But unfortunately, around the world, what we're essentially doing is just sticking wings on that caterpillar, right? We're kind of shoehorning these stellar technologies into the old regulatory structures, the old infrastructure, and so we don't get the full benefits of these stellar technologies, the kind of super abundance that they produce. But also, we get just a horrible hybrid, a chimera that just that actually causes more problems. And that's why, despite the rapid drop in costs of these stellar technologies, solar, wind, and batteries, they're not being reflected in consumer prices, because we've got 10-year regulatory queues in California, and we've got, for connection to the grid, because we're having to build way more storage, because rather than supersizing generating capacity as we should do, we're building, we're trying to find these kind of clunky storage solutions, and it's all just a horrible kind of mess right now, because we're essentially building this hybrid system, this chimera. We're not building this kind of distributed stellar energy system.
And as a consequence, is it still true that there is no concrete example, or are there glimpses of the approach that is being done the right way, the way it should be done, rather than building chimeras, as you call them, monstrosities where the old and new try to coexist and it shouldn't? In the past, we had the very blunt but effective instrument of was that created a tabula rasa, and then, whether it was moving from monarchies to republics and democracies, or whatever other radical change was needed, everyone who was dead, they were wrong. And everyone who was right, well, they were the winners. And today, hopefully, that is not going to be the solution, with nuclear weapons still in the thousands or tens of thousands that could wipe out civilization. So what are the steps? Let's assume you have 3 people watching, and there are many more, but there are 3 people watching. One of them is a technologist, another is a policymaker, and the third is just someone who cares for their family, their children, and want them to thrive. So what can they do? What should they be doing, each of these 3, in order to build the stellar world rather than a chimera?
So let's start with energy, right, David? Because energy is the base of unless you have a stellar energy system. I mean, basically, it's going to be a chimera. We need to start thinking about it as an internet of electricity, where pretty much the internet is open. Anybody, I mean, you're able to do this podcast without asking anybody for permission, right? Imagine you had to ask the old newspaper industry for permission to do this, or anybody had to ask, the old newspaper industry before posting something on LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever. It's an internet of electrons. So essentially, step number one is the right mindset, which is that SWB is not a cleaner version of the old centralized system. It's just not, right? Just like the social media is not just a faster version of the old newspaper industry. Does that make sense? So the first thing to do is think of it that way. And if you do, then you say, you know what, every single person and business on this planet, or at least in this country or in this region or in this city, has the right to generate, store, and trade stellar energy. Anybody, right? So without asking your neighbor for permission, without having to ask your city for permission, just the way that treat electricity as speech. Does that make sense? Anybody and everybody has the right to do it. If Google wants a data center, they can build their own SWB system. If Amazon wants a data center, they can also do the same thing. Anybody. I mean, we don't need to go through the center. We still have this very centralized system where we have a bunch of monopolies, centralization, hierarchies, top down, and based on scarcity. And a stellar energy system is based on superabundance. If you build it from the ground up, essentially the way we built the internet, SWB system not only will it create, is the cheapest possible energy system that you can build in most places on the planet, at least south of Alaska, including Alaska actually. And essentially, it's going to generate at least 5 times more energy than the existing system. Super abundant energy most times of the year at zero marginal cost, right? So you have, just like today, we have this super abundance of information, right? Maybe too much information. Does that make sense? At zero marginal cost. And the SWB system has the economics of information, right? Once you build the system, it's a super abundant, zero marginal cost system, right? So forget all the centralization that is driving all of these chimeras that are making the system worse, because we're shoehorning a stellar technology into an extractive business model that is based on scarcity, whereas SWB system is based on superabundance. SWB costs are going down by 80 to 90% per year, whereas extractive basically technologies are going up, right? So that's the first thing that I would do, right? Think about it as an internet and give everybody their right.
Very, very interesting. And the first person that I heard talking about it this way was 18 years ago, the inventor of the Ethernet, who spoke about the Enernet, and he would envision it developing the way that we are seeing it now. Now, you talk about AL, artificial labor, covering both physical labor with robots and intellectual labor, digital labor with AI. And a growing number of people coming from their competitive, extractive mindset are, rather than feeling excited and exhilarated, they feel threatened when they hear that AI is coming and robots are coming, and they don't see a way out. Or if they do, they resort to even stronger centralized control, where a universal basic income system is, in my view, a perfect dystopian way for a state to define whether you can live or die, because the spigot of the UBI can be turned off anytime. There is no United Nations Declaration of Human Rights that says you have that UBI being dribbled down to you every month or every day. What you propose instead is a system of stellar rights. Can you explain why that should make people feel more confident about this future transformation, where they are not defined by work anymore? They will and hopefully find satisfaction in the things they do, but society is not going to expel them and label them as worthless if they are unemployed. How will it work, and why is it better than UBI?
So shall I answer that, Tony? We got
Yeah.
So, I mean, first of all, let's deal with the kind of the timescale and this idea of work, because, I mean, whether it's 10 years or whether it's 50 years, right, the trajectory is that, humans won't be able to compete with artificial intelligence and artificial labor, robotics, in the production system at all, right? I mean, it's in the same way a horse can compete with a car, right? It's going to improve and improve and improve, and it's going to be able to do everything we can do productively, well, within the production system, within whatever time scale, right? It is, we don't need to argue about the time scale, but the end point is that. So the question is, what do we do? Is that terrifying, right? And when you're coming from an extractive perspective, right, that's terrifying, right? The only way we can survive is by selling our labor for capital, right? That's the essence of work through the history of civilization. Well, if we're allowed to do that and we're not enslaved, which is the other model of labor within extraction. So, it can be perceived as terrifying. But if you stand back and you look at what's possible and you can see that stellar world as a real possibility, well, then it's incredibly freeing, right? We could, free ourselves from labor. We're no longer one of those exploited inputs, part of that X-flow into the production system. As Tony's very fond of saying, right, the system works for us rather than us working for the system. Right, there's a difference between extraction and stellar, and it's a really important one. We kind of, as humanity and actually as the planet, we transcend the system of production. Right, we're no longer the inputs into it, and that could be incredibly empowering and incredibly freeing. Right, and we'd all have access potentially to super abundant energy and intelligence to do whatever it is we want to do. And we'll have to find different ways to live, different ways to find purpose, and so on and so forth. But that could be the most extraordinary, exploration. It doesn't have to lead to sort of horrible dystopian behaviors. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing is to say, well, how do you take care of people? How do you both protect people during that transformation, as change happens really fast, societies are destabilized, people lose work in different industries at different times and so on. And how do you protect them, in the future state, right? And I think, UBI as a concept is clearly an extraction concept, right? It's about redirecting the flow of capital, right? So it's an extractive solution, but it might be useful during that period of transformation, right? We'll need to protect people who have lost their jobs, who have lost and whether that's a universal basic income or it's a basic income, like Social Security, that goes to those people who have lost their jobs rather than everyone in specific industries. But we will need to protect people through this transformation. We'll have the tools available to do it. But ultimately, that's not a solution in the end state, right? The only solution we think that really works in that end state is sort of, essentially public ownership of the means of production, right, of the production system, right? Where we all have a right, like a star or a sun, we all have a right to stand in the sun, right? This system, irrespective of demand, will produce useful output, of energy, of food, of intelligence. And so we would have what we think of as stellar rights, right? A right to share in that output. And that's the future model. And so as the graph you were showing before, is we'll need extraction solutions which will scale down on this X curve, and stellar solutions that will scale up. But the challenge really that we face is to see what's happening, like to understand that this is the case, and that we need to implement these types of solutions. And it's certainly doable. And if you think that, I mean, there's another there are plenty of other mechanisms we discuss in the book. But if you think about energy and labor specifically, as right now, in the extractive model, they come from people, and they come generally from fossil fuels. They're inflationary. They have huge cost. As we begin to move towards a stellar world, as we start on that journey, we're going to see, we think, huge deflation, right? Energy and technology will essentially go on to technology cost curves, and every year will reduce in cost, right? Which gives us the opportunity during the transformation, essentially, to print a bunch of money. Right, the flaw in modern monetary theory, or the constraint essentially to printing money, is inflation, right? But with a massive background deflationary force, we'll have to print money to keep the show on the road, to stop defaulting on the debt that we've built up before. Deflation's terrible in a highly leveraged society. So we'll, what do we do with that money? Well, we talk about concepts like print and build, right? Print and build that stellar energy system. But you could also print and pay, right? You could use that money you're paying to support those people. I mean, what we're saying is governments might have the capacity with which to support people through this transformation. But the end goal has to be, open ownership or unownership even of the means of production, just rights to share in the output.
Yeah, and the key we need to protect people during this transformation. However we do it, we need to protect people, right? Not extractive industries, not extractive companies or institutions or whatever. We need to protect people. We need to raise the floor, right? So that people feel safe to participate in this transformation. They're not going to be afraid of this change. They're going to welcome it. So we need to protect people.
That is especially challenging because the United States has been supporting and promoting a view of social dynamics that is the opposite of not only socialism and communism, but the opposite of European social democracies that recognize the need for safety nets. And the US seems to be on a trajectory to be proudly dismantling, in the name of creative destruction, every possible protection there is. So obviously, change is not going to be universal and simultaneous, marching in lockstep all over the world. It will come at differential rates in different places. But what you said about this need of protecting people, I think, is important as a message for those societies that until now felt they could afford to be more Darwinian, more cutthroat, because they felt it was good for competition, it was good for pushing people to their limit. But the profundity of this transformation could push people to a breaking point where social collapse and revolutions and bloody conflict is the consequence. And even though those who are optimists like me believe that there's a certain degree of inevitability in a positive outcome at the end, how we get there still matters. Now, one of the things that you talk about is connected to this, and for me it is a little bit difficult sometimes in the book to take a label and then immediately understand whether you are talking about it technologically or metaphorically or as an inspiration. And one of these labels is radiance, where radiance is obviously the rays of the sun. So when we talk about solar panels, that's the radiance and complete technological and engineering translation of the term. But you are also talking in the book about radiance as something that can restore the environment, something that can even restore individual health and well-being. So
Yes.
help me and other readers get that may have the same challenges I do in correctly
Yeah.
positioning how you feel about this terminology.
So, I was talking about stellar energy, which 100% solar wind and battery. It produces everything that we need in terms of energy. And on top of that, it produces 3, 4, 5 times more energy than we need. In the past, we called that superpower, right? It's all because, it takes negative entropy from the sun, it produces energy. And on top of that, it produces additional energy, right? Superpower, that's radiance. We can use that radiance to create a system that is self-healing, to heal itself, to power, the labor to improve itself technologically, to restore itself, and also to restore the world around it, right? So each stellar society will generate super production, right, of labor, of energy, of that can be used both to heal, improve, and restore inside that society and outside. So, the extraction is a system that has been traumatic. It has been traumatic for the planet and for people, right? We all carry that trauma, the generational trauma of extraction, and radiance is the additional energy, the negative entropy that we can use to heal that trauma, right? We can heal the damage of extraction, both metaphorically and physically. And
David, could I just very quickly explain how the super production comes? Because I don't think we covered it earlier, and it might be confusing to listeners. That from an energy perspective, when we build a solar, wind, and battery system, because the generation is the piece of the puzzle that's on the Costco. What you end up doing is sizing the system for the darkest day of winter, essentially, or the darkest days of winter. So you have enough generation, even on one of these March days, this dark March days that we're enjoying in England right now. That when you build a system like that, which is the cheapest way you can build a stellar energy system, the rest of the year you get super abundant production. So over the course of the year, you'll get in somewhere like the UK 4 or 5 times as much energy by meeting the need of today. And with robotics, for instance, with labor, right, we'll build enough capacity to replace what humanity does today, because we'll do that because it's lower cost. But those same robots, just with generations of software updates and eventually rebuilding, will do ever more work, right? I mean, we'll see 50 or 2x more work from in terms of speed and in terms of performance through software. So we'll have a super abundance of labor as well, and as Tony says, with super abundant labor and super abundant energy, right, you have the just immense possibilities.
We mentioned that the transition is going to be disruptive, infrastructural, foundational into a new form of civilization. It will also be fast. We mentioned that we need to protect people, and you talk about necessary guardrails. Do you see a role for regulations what kind of positive role regulations can play if we don't want or cannot afford a free-for-all experimentation with no regards for risks or downsides?
Yeah, so let me start, with just a clarification, and then Jamie, will offer up some ideas. But I just want to clarify that we don't need 200 countries to do this, right? Or we don't need 8 billion people to agree. We don't need a centralized United Nations kind of top-down kind of way of doing this. We do not, right? What we need is somebody somewhere, like any disruption and transformation throughout history, somebody somewhere makes it happen, right? And then it spreads because it's the best possible product or society and so on. So what we need really is 5 or 10 smaller societies on the edge of current incumbency. I don't think this is going to happen in the US or in Europe, right? These are the centers of incumbency. Maybe in Ukraine, but Europe is basically, I don't need to repeat that, but if we get a handful of societies on the edge, Israel, UAE, Bhutan, Ukraine, and so on, to start experimenting, because for purely economic reasons, right? I mean, this is not about pushing them to do something that they would not do anyway, because all of these technologies are disrupting even within the extractive system. Does that make sense? Whether it's AL, AI, and SWB, and so on. So I think that's an important clarification, that we don't need to convince anybody. A handful of folks starting this experiment, and one of them rising and becoming a stellar society, it's going to be so much wealthier than the rest of humanity that the rest of the world is going to have to, right? They don't have to, because there is no growth imperative, but they'll want to imitate it, right? And that's important to understand, that there is no growth imperative in stellar, right? So if one society makes it to stellar, by definition, they would be able to and happy to share and collaborate with others who want to become stellar too. There is no growth imperative as there is in extraction.
Oh.
Yes, Jamie, sorry, please.
No, I was just going to come back to the guardrails. So, I mean, Tony makes a great point, is look, these things happen in a kind of bottom-up emergent way. It's not necessarily the kind of the government in the center kind of pulling the strings and making it happen. In terms of the guardrails, right, I mean, absolutely, we talked about protecting people through this transformation being a critical piece. But ultimately, I think it's, one of the critical guardrails is sort of, I think of as raising the floor to collapse, right? Which Tony and I talk about. We'd be crazy anywhere in the world not to build a stellar energy system today, right? It'd be lower cost, but it's not just lower cost. It's the fact that it's much more secure, right? You have no geopolitical risk to it. There's no flow required once you've built it, right? There's none of those acute geopolitical risks that we see in our current energy system. There's no volatility, right? There's no it's a fully distributed and resilient system. You don't have any of the kind of risks that you have, because as you pointed out, this transformation is going to be incredibly destabilizing, right? Not just socially, economically, politically, but geopolitically, and we would expect, if people don't see this coming and properly plan for it, there'd be a mess, and so if you're trapped in an extractive energy system, then and global supply chains break down and we get marred in kind of conflict, then you can fall much further, right? Without the flow of oil and gas and coal, right? You're not eating, let alone communicating and heating and so on and so forth. But if you have stellar energy, right, you're kind of resilient and secure, at least to some degree. You've got much less far to fall. So I think it's imperative that everywhere in the world begins to do this. But so that for me is the ultimate guardrail, right? And then there are social and economic and personal guardrails. I mean, a lot of this is about, look, we generally as humans tend to be terrified of change. Right? That's exactly what populist leaders exploit, that fear of change and instability and uncertainty. Tony and I, I mean, it's probably too much information at the moment, but we spend a lot of time discussing and working on ourselves, how we can kind of embrace change, lean into it, build what Nassim Taleb calls, anti-fragility, that ability to get stronger through stress and change. And I think that's critical for both individuals and society. It's sort of almost like a vaccination to populists. If you're welcoming change and instability because you can grow through it, it makes you less susceptible to those sorts of messages. But more importantly than that, it allows you to deal with change, right, rather than kind of shy away from it and look to hold on to the past. So you asked a question earlier about what can individuals do, and it's to build those capacities, to work on ourselves. I think is incredibly important as we come to a period that is inevitably going to be hugely destabilizing.
And I believe in the possibility of extending one's limits of adaptability, training oneself to be more neotenic, more able to absorb the novelty, to enjoy the novelty, even the risk taking. And you very correctly said that more stellar technologies are incorporated in one's life, the more that risk taking becomes possible, because it is clear that if things don't work out, well, the worst that can happen is that you try again with something different. And that is true both at the level of individuals, but also at the level of societies. Yes, Tony.
And I mean, I was going to mention that, I mean, what extraction has brought is extractive mindsets, right? And extraction has been the epigenetics, right, that has made individuals, what we call extractive behaviors and extractive emotions, the negative emotions, right? A lot of folks talk about human nature, but in fact, what they really mean is human nature within extraction. So humans have capacities to love, to capacity for joy, for creativity, for compassion, and so on. We also have the capacity for hatred and anger and destruction and so on. And in the difference in when those behaviors and emotions show up is in the context, is in the epigenetic.
And I cannot but point out that your illustrator was a bit sexist, because they associated the negative with the male and the positive with the female in the contours of that figure. But I don't think
I'm glad you noticed that.
I don't think that was conscious, but the context determines our behaviors and our emotions and so on. And extractive individuals are not going to bring a stellar society, right? I mean, we need to take the first step individually to become stellar humans, right? And we can do that. Anybody can do that. So, you asked what we can do, and this is a first step. I mean, basically, we need to become stellar humans, and it's not going to happen overnight, but it's something that we can all do. And you mentioned putting up a solar panel. It's something that most of us can do, and there are a lot of things that we can, a first step, right? This is not as an extraction. In extraction, a lot of things are out there; they're excludable, right? But in Stellar, a lot of things are in here within us to take the first step to become a stellar human, to bring a stellar society. So this is not just about technology, it's about the human.
You established a new organization, Stellar Worldwide Foundation, and everyone can go to stellarworld.com, start buying the book, reading it, understand it. Among our viewers, we had some very eager questions about language translations, for example, into German. And I hope that you or your publisher or publicist are arranging that, because definitely your ideas deserve to be read in the native language of those who don't speak English. Why did you decide to set up a separate organization from RethinkX, which you two together founded as well? And what will be the activities besides popularizing these ideas and inspiring people to follow the ideas of Stellar Worldwide?
Yeah. So, David, I mean, what RethinkX does well is the science, right? It does the research that underpins, the broader thesis. And I think, look, if I'm being perfectly honest, we don't do, that's our expertise within that organization, and we want to continue, and we want to keep that team protected from. We get a lot of requests from governments, from businesses, from investors to kind of help them do things, right? They like our work and they want to know, what does it mean for us? And in the past we've kind of gone down that road, and it's ended up distracting from the core mission, which is to create the science, to create the researches. So Tony and I were very keen to keep RethinkX focused purely on science. So that's what RethinkX is, and that's what RethinkX remains. And we don't have any ambition to build a huge organization at all. We've got a great team there, brilliant researchers who are harnessing some of the tools that are available to us now to become ever more productive.
I greatly enjoyed to have Adam Dorr on the show as well,
Yes.
who's a member of your team.
So
he enjoyed
Adam's actually, he loved it. He sends it. He's actually with us where we are right now, and he's he's head of research, and he's a brilliant guy, and we're
he's an amazing guy.
Have him.
Yeah, we are. We're very fortunate to have Adam. Extremely lucky to have him. But RethinkX will continue to do the science, right? And this book for us is the first step to Stellar. It's what we call a low definition map, right? A lot of things, we don't know everything. We still need to do a lot of work on the science of both the stellar world and on the journey to Stellar, right? So we have a low definition map. It's the best possible map with what we know, but RethinkX will continue to do simulations and science and so on to help fill in higher definition on the X curve. So extraction is collapsing, right, and Stellar is emerging. So that's the X curve of humanity, and RethinkX will continue to do that science 100%.
And Stellar then is really a kind of media and communications organization, and that's the skill set we're building there. This is about getting the message out there, giving people the vision of what's possible, trying to help people lift their heads outside of that box of extraction to see what is possible, what it actually might be the real cure to the problems we're facing in society today. And I think it's all about finding the fellow travelers, creating the evangelists, finding, just spreading the word. And I think the actual doing is going to be down to others, right? The actual implementation and execution is going to be, but we're just trying to essentially sell the vision right now.
And Tony and Jamie, I'm happy and honored to have contributed a little bit to this spreading of the ideas, and to have been able and welcome you during this crucial and exciting moment of the launch of your new book, which I greatly enjoyed reading. And the ideas, as you said, are so all-encompassing and so transformative that yes, they deserve to be analyzed and shared at a finer resolution, at a deeper way in various formats that I'm sure you will discover and then realize in the coming days and months and years. So thank you for having been with us. There have been a lot of questions that came in from the Middle East, from Mexico, from Germany, and from so many other places. And we haven't been able to look at all of them, but I want to thank Arturo and Janet and Emiliano and everyone else who asked questions, and I will try to go through them and answer them on the various platforms: LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, X, where we have been. And I encourage you, Tony and Jamie, if you have any time, to just look through, and if you see something, to maybe just provide your particular answer. Anyone who caught only the tail end will be able to watch the entire conversation on the same URL we had before. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation as well as I have and our viewers have.
Yeah. Thank you, David. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us today at Searching for the Question Live. I am looking forward to our conversations in the future with new guests, with exciting ideas like the ones that we have seen Tony and Jamie sharing with us today. Goodbye.